It begins with fog. Not the battlefield kind cut by light and steel, but the heavy, living fog of Alsace. Thick as breath, cold as memory. It curls around the shoulders of the soldiers and settles in their boots like doubt. 35,000 men waiting for a command that never comes. Their general Armand de Valeroy stands at the crest of the ridge, unmoving, gloved hands behind his back, eyes tracing invisible lines through the murk. In front of him, no fire, no glory, no movement. Just mist. Behind him, a nation waiting to ignite. The orders from Paris had arrived in full brass. Advance. Engage. Break through. Remind them who we are. But the general, in all his silence, had already decided he would not win this war. Because he saw what they did. That winning would only wake the wolves. Armand de Valeroy was born in 1841, on the edge of a fading world. His father had once been a colonel in Algeria, hardened and hollowed by campaign life. His mother, quiet and sharp, was a forgotten daughter of the old nobility. Between them, a son built of discipline and distance. He grew up in a stone house that echoed when no one spoke. Which was often. At 16, he was sent to the Saints' military academy. He didn't drink. He didn't duel. He didn't shine. He won war games by retreating. He passed oratory by quoting Roman Stoics. His peers called him Le Phantom, but instructors called him something else, the man you send when you need a war not to happen. He saw his first blood in the sands of Kabylie. Not in combat, but in the aftermath. A village razed too quickly. Children among the debris. He buried 3 bodies, himself unbidden, while the others smoked and joked. Later that night, he wrote in a notebook, "War reveals the character not of enemies, but of those who command." Years passed. Wars passed. He rose through the ranks with the slow gravity of someone who neither asked for nor refused responsibility. He married once. Briefly. She died in childbirth. And he never spoke her name again. By 1895, General Armand de Valeroy commanded the 6th Army Corps stationed along the boiling frontier of Alsace-Lorraine. Paris grew nervous. A skirmish at Riquewihr left 6 French soldiers dead. The public, inflamed by memory and pride, cried for vengeance. The general staff drafted a campaign plan. They named it Operation Mistral Diver. Valeroy was handed the envelope personally. He opened it, slowly, read it once, folded it again, and burned it in his tent. On the morning he was expected to move, he stood before his officers and said calmly, "There will be no battle today, or tomorrow, or the day after that." There was silence. Captain Marchand asked, cautiously, "Sir, the men are prepared. The objective is mapped. The bridges are built." Valeroy nodded, then replied, "Simply so we shall wait until they are no longer needed." And so they waited. The first days were uneventful. He kept the men warm. Rotated units. Doubled food rations. Wrote letters. Sent his best surgeon across the river under a flag of truce to tend to German wounded. He issued no further orders. Paris fumed. After 10 days, the War Ministry sent him a telegram, "Advance or explain." His reply, "I prefer to let the living remain so." Another came, "Advance or be relieved." He returned, "I understand." He wrote a single personal letter during that winter to a woman named Claire Latour. She had once sent him a poem after hearing him speak in Laon. They had exchanged 3 letters. Nothing more. In this final one, he wrote, "I can win this war in 3 days, but the cost will echo for 30 years. They want glory. I see graves. They want to strike. I want to prevent the next 1,000 funerals. If I must be remembered as the man who refused to act, then let it be because I knew what acting meant." 3 days later, he was removed from command. His successor launched the assault within hours. 2 hills and 1 village were taken. Over 4,000 lives were lost in 3 days. The public cheered. Then diplomacy resumed. The war dissolved. Nothing changed. Armand de Valeroy disappeared from public life. He bought a cottage in Montauban. He tended bees. He read Tacitus. He refused interviews. He died in 1913. His will requested no military ceremony. His grave bore no rank. Only one word, Assins. Enough. In 1916, a trench in Verdun cut directly through the hill he had once refused to cross. A French lieutenant wrote in his diary, "They say a general once stood here and did nothing. I walk through what he spared. I step on bones. Decades passed." In 1942, a junior archivist at a military depot near Lyon found a crate labelled Obsolete Cartography 1895. Inside were Valeroy's field maps, his diagrams, his journals. One page, in clean ink: "If power means taking life, then restraint must mean saving it. No medal honours the man who stops a war. But there should be a silence that does." In 1971, a German military historian, Dr. Hild Steinbruck, uncovered references to Valeroy's name in post-war German memoirs. Officers remembered the quiet Frenchman. One wrote, "He stared at us from across the valley and did nothing. We never forgot it. We never forgave him, because we knew he would not have done the same." Steinbruck published an essay titled "The General Who Refused to Win." It went unnoticed for 20 years. Then came the resurgence. In 1989, at the Col de Guerre, a professor included Valeroy's journals in a course on ethical command. In 2003, during coalition planning for an urban offensive in Iraq, a general referenced one of his lines, "Just because we can does not mean we understand what we are about to do." The plan was paused, revived. No one credited Valeroy. But his silence echoed. There is a plaque now, on a quiet hill near the Alsace line. It reads, "Here, a man chose not to win, and by waiting saved lives no one counted. No wreaths, no flags, only wind." And perhaps that is the truest legacy, not to be praised, not to be remembered, but to be the reason someone else is. 2 weeks before his removal, a sealed envelope arrived at Valeroy's field desk. It bore no insignia, just a single name: Oberst Erich Marlburg, the German commander stationed across the valley. Inside, a short letter written in fluent, formal French: "General, I have noticed your silence. I suspect it is not cowardice. You may not believe this, but I have prayed each night that you would not attack, because if you do, I will be forced to answer. And I too have no appetite for another river of boys. If your inaction is intentional, then you are not alone." Marlburg. Valeroy read it twice. He did not respond in writing. But the next morning, he sent his quartermaster to the German lines with 2 carts full of surplus medical gauze and morphine. No message. Just a ledger for receipt. The Germans returned the favour 3 days later, 5 crates of firewood and 1 case of brandy. Unopened. No soldier on either side understood what was happening. But for a time, war stood still between 2 men who had seen too much of it. When Valeroy's successor, General Hugues Delmarche, arrived, he was greeted with a field already prepared. Bridges laid. Maps marked. Artillery pre-aimed. He frowned. "Why haven't we advanced?" his aide replied. "Because General Valeroy didn't want to lose men." Delmarche scoffed. Then he never understood the point. The assault began at 6 a.m. the following day. By noon, over 2,000 were dead. By sunset, the rest were dying or retreating. The hills were retaken 3 days later by the enemy, but the bodies remained. Delmarche received a medal. Then a nervous breakdown. He resigned within the year. Valeroy, in Montauban, learned of the casualties from a local paper. He didn't comment. But his neighbour later recalled seeing him stare at a tree for hours still, unblinking. Claire Lator died in 1916. A childless schoolteacher. She left behind boxes of letters, books, and a diary never meant for publication. One passage he wrote that he refused to act, but that is not true. He acted against everything the world demanded of him. He acted for the unborn, for the unknown, and perhaps for the girl who once wrote him a poem, asking him to remember that restraint is a form of bravery. Her words were found 50 years later by a student archiving unused teaching materials. They were passed to a professor, then a publisher, then a general. In 1981, the French Ministry of Defense quietly created a lecture series titled Command and Conscience. Valeroy's name was never spoken aloud, but his writing was read in every class. One colonel wrote in the margin, "This man did not lose history. He protected it from what it might have become." In a NATO base in 2007, a young strategist, Major Catherine Elifist, pressure to approve a drone strike on a compound housing both combatants and civilians. She hesitated, and then recalled a line from a French general she had never been taught in school, only whispered about in a reading group. Just because we are not wrong does not mean we are right. She delayed the strike. 2 children were later rescued from the target zone alive. She never took credit. But in her office, she kept a photo of a foggy hill in Alsace framed above her desk. The legacy of Armand de Valeroy was never loud. It did not appear in textbooks. His statue was never built. No state funeral. No Bama. But in the spaces between orders, in the hesitations before commands, his voice remained. He never called himself a pacifist. He was a soldier. He understood blood. He had seen it up close, smelled it in the sand, felt it on his gloves. But he also understood something far more dangerous than war, the moment when victory becomes habit, and conscience becomes optional. When asked, late in life, by a local farmer whether he regretted his service, Valeroy answered only this: I regret that history counts victories by borders and not by the lives quietly left intact. He died without a final word. His last journal entry simply read, Winter came late this year. The bees are slow. The frost has not touched the hive. In 2021, a military archivist named Julian Morand was digitizing the storage logs of Fort Vincennes. Deep in the stacks, he found a misfiled wooden box marked only Camp de Pontarlier Hiver 1895. Inside were the final journals of Armand de Valeroy. Never opened. Never cited. Each was bound in dark leather, numbered meticulously, with dried flowers pressed between the pages. Not for beauty, but for season. Each entry began with the date and the temperature. But beyond the tactics, the sketches, the rainfall and river levels were reflections that had never been meant for public eyes. One day they will ask why I did not fight, and I hope someone is brave enough to ask why everyone else did. Victory is easy to recognize. Mercy isn't. They will forget my name. But perhaps they will pause before they give the next order. That is enough. Morand submitted a proposal to publish the journals. It was declined, but the files were leaked anonymously to a public domain archive. They spread like wildfire in officers' circles, not through press but through personal whispers. In 2024, a cadet at École Militaire de Saint-Cyr was given a scenario in a live exercise: neutralize an enemy position housing combatants and unarmed civilians. She paused. Her instructor asked why she delayed. She replied, because I refuse to win like this. Silence fell in the classroom. Later, the instructor approached her and said only Valeroy would have approved. And so the silence lives, not as absence, but as presence. Not as weakness, but as the deepest form of courage. It exists in the cracks between command and obedience, in the questions cadets now dare to ask, in the letters never sent, but always remembered, in the hills that are not taken, in the bombs that are not dropped, in the orders delayed long enough for another voice to be heard. Some say the greatest generals are those who lead armies to conquest. But perhaps the greatest are those who step forward, look at the map, look at the men, look at history, and then, with full knowledge of what they're denying, say nothing. So let this be the story of the man who said nothing. Let it be read not on monuments, but in moments of hesitation. Let it be taught not in books, but in the breathing pause between war and peace. And let it end not with glory, but with quiet. Because sometimes that is all that remains of the people we should have listened to sooner.